Welcome back to another edition of the Hart2Heart Podcast. My guest today is a returning guest, Dr. Andrew G Huff. So, Huff, welcome back to the show, brother.
Thank you for having me back. I love your show.
So, I want to chat with you today for, a few different reasons. There's a bunch of stuff going on that you're super involved with on your Twitter. You're always posting something, seems lately that's, almost like bombshell news, so to speak, just because of what's happened with the new Republican caucus that's coming in and RFK Jr. and your relationship with him and all that. But just before we get into it, I know you've been on the show before. Maybe just give the audience a little bit of a brief background about yourself.
Sure. So I'm not a typical doctor or scientist. I started off my career in the U.S. military as an infantryman. I did 2 combat tours. I decided to become a scientist and as an experiential learner. So I have degrees in weird things, psychology, engineering, security technology, and PhDs in epidemiology. I did a postdoc in artificial intelligence and complex systems at MIT. Deep state scientist, Q cleared, and worked on all sorts of health security and health intelligence applications and problems of, I guess, great national security importance, which I can't talk about in high detail for the U.S. government.
Well, it's quite the background. So we're lucky to have people like you out there. I know that there's certain things that you can't talk about today, but maybe one day you'll be able to come back on and talk about those things. So I know, there's a lot has happened since we last chatted. I mean, I think we last chatted a year, maybe 2 years ago. One thing that I want to know, maybe just right off the bat, I'm not sure if you're gonna be able to give us any intel on this or not, but since RFK Jr. has been appointed, I mean, a lot of people are wondering, what's going to happen now to Anthony Fauci? Is he going to be prosecuted? We know that that RFK Jr. wrote a book on him. I think it's called Real Anthony Fauci. It was a bestseller. Everyone always says, like, if everything in the book wasn't true, then he would obviously be getting sued at some point. I mean, you would think that's what would happen if someone wrote a book where there was lies in it. That's never happened. From as far as I know, no one's ever sued Robert Kennedy Jr. told him he's spreading lies about Dr. Fauci, despite him writing a best-selling book. So, what is the deal with that? Is he going to be prosecuted, or how does RFK feel about this?
Oh, I mean, I think when RFK says that he wants to prosecute Anthony Fauci, I take him at his word. RFK has never lied to me personally. He's delivered 100% on every interaction or engagement that I've had with him. Anything that he said he was going to do, he's delivered for me personally. On top of that, you have President Trump. And I think President Trump just tweeted yesterday or the day before that he wants to prosecute Anthony Fauci. I've taken it a step further. And if you actually look at the U.S. law on this, since Anthony Fauci actually served and worked on projects for the Department of Defense, under U.S. law, the Department of Defense has the right to prosecute first. And if they defer prosecution, that can actually be deferred to the Department of Justice. And what happens if the Department of Defense prosecutes? That's a military tribunal. That's the United States Court of Military Justice. And prosecutions happen quicker. They're more efficient. They're less subject to bias from the media and the outside world. And that's really so that honor and justice can be restored quickly to the military. So funny, I actually had a whistleblower retaliation claim related to my book, The Truth About Wuhan and my blowing the whistle on the COVID's origins, with the Department of Defense. And when I met with the Office of Inspector General investigators about, I want to say probably 6 or 7 months ago, I suggested that if any of the claims in my whistleblower retaliation claim and also my whistleblower complaints were true, that the Department of Defense should use the UCMJ to prosecute people like Anthony Fauci. And I asked them if they were open to that. And they responded back like, yes, we're actually open to and receptive to using the tribunal process to prosecute these people. I think it's the most important, one of the most important things is that we actually prosecute these people within the military courts, because it's been so detrimental that the vaccine actually, you can unpack this. So from COVID origins to the fraud in the vaccine trials, to all the terrible things that Dr. Anthony Fauci did and his cohort of corrupt individuals, it all really falls under Department of Defense responsibility. So that's actually the correct place to try him for these crimes and his conspirators. And it's also important to try it there to actually restore honor and integrity to the military officer corps. You can, I guess I could talk about this forever and split it a million different ways, but the things that the vaccine policy did within the Department of Defense was so detrimental to morale. It was incredibly detrimental to recruitment efforts in the military. It's weakened our military due to all the different people being discharged with medical injuries. That's the right venue for this. And if DOD does refuse, I think Kash Patel will do an excellent job of investigating these crimes as the FBI director.
That's amazing news to hear, and I think a lot of people want to hear that, and I think it'll actually help restore, a lot of, just trust in public health and public health authorities, because we know that a lot of people lost trust in public health and government officials during COVID. I'm not sure if you saw that study that came out, maybe it was 3 or 4 months ago now, that indicated that before COVID, there was something like 70% trust in physicians and public health, and then it went down to like 40%. So, we're talking about basically half of the public's trust is basically gone now, and that's through peer-reviewed data. So we know that that's a major issue. So in terms of Anthony Fauci, we know that he was kind of like the main one behind it. Is there anyone else that you guys, or that the new caucus is sort of looking at going after? Or is he sort of the main target at this point?
I actually don't believe that Anthony Fauci is the main target. He's probably the most famous target. My former boss at Equal Alliance, Dr. Peter Daszak, has been essentially thrown under the bus by the intelligence community, by the other contractors, by all the other institutions and organizations involved. The government and Congress clearly signaled during the last session of Congress that Dr. Peter Daszak is expendable. Just by the line of questions they had during his line of questions at the COVID Select hearing, that was probably about, I think it was like last spring, like last March of last year. They pivoted in a way against Dr. Daszak in his hearing that they didn't do at Dr. Anthony Fauci's hearing. I was at both hearings, and they're clearly just throwing this sort of pseudo defense contractor, this pseudo intelligence contractor under the bus. And yes, Dr. Daszak has a lot of blame here, but Dr. Dasak's role in this, the things that he did in Equal Alliance wouldn't have been possible without Dr. Fauci. So I think Dr. Morris is going to go down. He was the number 2 at NIAID, reporting to Dr. Anthony Fauci. Dr. Daszak from Equal Alliance is going to go down. The really interesting character here that should go down, but who is currently being protected, is Dr. Ralph Barrick from the University of North Carolina. So if you look at this tangled web of all these different people who are involved with different aspects of this, at least with the gain-of-function research that had been conducted in the United States and illegally handed off to the Chinese, and that's a whole nother long list of individuals that are involved with that aspect, that criminal aspect of this. Is probably another 100 people, and I don't even know all the people involved with that. But you take a look at the scientists at the University of Carolina who had been developing this technology, handing it off to the Chinese. He was doing that via Equal Alliance. He's the only one involved to have had a closed door interview with COVID Select, which wasn't also called in for a public hearing. And if you go read through the transcript of this closed door hearing that he had, he admits that that he's been in contact with the intelligence community, probably the FBI. And it also appears that he's being protected by the FBI or some other aspect of the federal government. And what you sort of infer at this point is that maybe he might have turned state's witness, so to speak, or he might be a protected asset from the U.S. government. But I don't see how that's acceptable, or why the American people or the world should accept this, because this man is fundamentally responsible for developing the technology and transferring it to the Chinese. All the other people involved either just only were middlemen, so to speak. They either funded the research, or they're just helped hand it off to another entity or institution.
And so this guy was the guy who's involved with actually getting the gain-of-function research over into China, like finally implemented. Is that correct?
Well, no. Well, yes, he's responsible for 3 things. One, he actually developed the biotechnology. So the actual gain-of-function techniques and processes used to make the virus, he's responsible for that.
Okay.
He's also responsible for uh, various techniques and methods to edit viruses. So he's responsible for creating that technology. He also trained the students and some of the experts and other scientists in China on how to use these techniques. Okay. Then lastly, he actually transferred the intellectual property of the genetic material, and uh, some of the genetic material is synthetic. It starts to get confusing, to the Chinese. And all this technology transfer that I keep on saying, this technology, what we're talking about here is advanced biotechnology, and it's illegal to transfer advanced biotechnology that can be weaponized to the Chinese. And this had been going on out in the open for 10 years.
And you feel that that guy is protected or has some kind of link maybe to like the deep state, we'll call it, to some degree.
Well, it's not even so much the deep state. It's very clear. So there's an intellectual property transfer agreement. So go back to the timeline of how this, what we were told about when the virus emerged versus what actually happened. So we were told that this virus emerged from China in mid to late December 2019. Okay, and a lot of people still believe this. Then the government rolled it back, and other experts, oh, well, the virus emerged in October 2019. That's all BS. The truth is, the virus emerged in late August, early September 2019. There's intelligence, there's epidemiology, there's actually satellite surveillance of this laboratory in China. Okay. Now, I'm going to fast forward everything else because there's a lot of other interesting things that happened up until December 2019. But in December 2019, there's an intellectual property transfer agreement, which is signed between NIH, NIAID, Dr. Anthony Fauci, Dr. Ralph Baric at the University of North Carolina, and Moderna, the vaccine manufacturer for SARS-CoV-2.
When was that? Sorry?
December 2019.
December 2019. Okay, this is getting interesting. Okay, go ahead.
Yes. So the details surrounding that intellectual property transfer agreement have not been released to the public. But what that suggests is that Operation Warp Speed to develop the Operation Warp Speed to actually develop the SARS-CoV-2 mRNA vaccine at Moderna began in December 2019. And that's because the US government knew that this virus was spreading around the planet probably back in late September 2019. And there's another number of facts that can all, I could point you to if you wanted to investigate that further. But in the interest of time, if you want to take my word for it here, the virus had been spreading around the planet. The US government knew they had to do something. They tried to put this vaccine into development as fast as they could. And Dr. Ralph Baric's signature is on this paper, or actually the University of North Carolina's signature is on this paper, on this agreement, because Moderna had vaccine candidates for SARS-CoV-2, and they were working on these vaccine candidates in partnership with Dr. Ralph Baric.
That's wild. I mean, the timeline of that, I think, is what will freak a lot of people out, because December 2019, that's when, again, you just said it, most people think that the virus, probably just emerged. But obviously, through epidemiological studies and other methods that you just mentioned, we know that it was likely there, months before that. But still, that's got to be bothersome for a lot of people. And I think a lot of people would like, that to be investigated. I mean, you'd like to see that report online, what was in that report, what was in that agreement, and why were they signing something in December of 2019? Like, what was it that they knew that we didn't know, and why wasn't this made more public? Like, it just seems like there's, a lot there to uncover. And I really hope that whoever investigates that, finds it all out and puts it online for everyone to see.
I think it's clear that the US government knows exactly what happened. And there's a couple of things that I can point to. So first of all, there's already a law, a bipartisan law that's on the books that ordered the US government to declassify and release all documents related to COVID in China. It was passed over a year and a half ago. And as of today, the US government, the Biden administration, has not complied with their own law. This has never happened. The declassification has never occurred, and they never released all the documents. Instead, what happened is that the ODNI released a report summary of the documents to the public. And it's another one of these whitewashed reports that doesn't really tell you much. So the other thing that happened recently this past week is that the COVID Select Committee in the House released a report, 500-page report, or 525 pages, I think exactly, of everything they found during their investigation related to COVID. And it's another one of these reports that sort of tells all the other people in the know what we already know. And there's nothing really exciting coming out of this report. What's really exciting is that they have a classified version of this report. So I don't know if the classified version is secret or top secret. They typically don't tell you that, but they say there's a classified version. Well, why did they have a classified version of this report to begin with? So this is an infectious disease that's spread around the planet. Why would anything, if this was naturally emerging, as some people claim, and now I think most people believe it's a laboratory leak. If this were even just a simple laboratory leak, why is there a classified report? We have a lot of the books ordering the declassification of all these documents, and our own government hasn't complied with it. I mean, what should happen right now in the United States, the process here is that, okay, the federal government's not complying with the law. Someone should sue the federal government in federal court and say the executive branch is breaking its own law. It's pretty much a slam dunk win case in U.S. federal court. And this hasn't happened. None of the state attorney generals have done that yet. So really what needs to happen is our government right now in the United States is so corrupt. We are a complete banana republic. I mean, I hate to admit it, but the United States is not in a position to speak anymore about our integrity, our lack of corruptions, because we are entirely corrupt at this point. So when the new administration comes in, when President Trump is sworn in on Inauguration Day, and Bobby Kennedy is sworn in, hopefully, and I think this is going to happen, that all these documents are going to be declassified so everyone finally can take a look at them, the documents, evaluate themselves, and come to their own conclusions about the truth is. And I think what that's going to yield is that all the people that were called conspiracy theorists are now going to be the smartest people on the planet, and we're all going to be experts again.
Yeah, I mean, that's been happening, quite a bit already. So I can only imagine that with more declassifications of documents that, we'll see more and more of that. But I'm really excited for, Trump to get in just so that we can, look at all these documents and just get all these things, declassified. So, thanks again for filling us in on that. I know I only got you for an hour, and there are a few other things that I wanted to chat with you about. So one of them was, RFK got in. We know that the MAHA movement to make America healthy again movement's kind of getting stronger and stronger. There's been some pushback on it, but for the most part, it's been pretty strong. What specific actions is he going to take that will make America healthy again?
Well, I've heard a number of things from the sort of, armchair pundits about what actions Bobby will take. And then there are the public statements. So, I mean, so the first thing is there's been a lot of speculation around what he will do in terms of vaccine policy. Some people are concerned that he's going to take all vaccines off the market. And I think, one thing that was put forward is that all vaccines should be pulled off the market until they went through a negative controlled clinical trial. So one of the dirty secrets of the vaccine industry is that the vast majority of vaccines have not went through a proper negative controlled clinical trial. So, you have to ask yourself scientifically, what are we doing here? And the sad thing as an epidemiologist, I was led to believe as a PhD student that all these vaccines went through proper safety and effectiveness testing. And that's just not the case. So when you start to dig into the literature and you look at these vaccines to see what type of testing they've been through, they have not, a lot of these vaccines have not had rigorous effectiveness and safety tested. So I don't think that Bobby is going to take all these vaccines off the market. I think what he's going to do is that he's going to allow the individual, and namely parents, to choose which vaccines their children receive. So basically, there's no federal government mandate. And if you look at how the government functions in the United States, the federal government can, pull back a mandate, get rid of a mandate for vaccines. And under the Constitution of the United States, each state actually has the right to regulate vaccines if they choose, and so does each local government. So some states might choose to have their own vaccine policies, which differ from the federal government, and that's just the way the United States works. And I totally support each state and each local government to be able to make those decisions as a communities. If you look at some of the other things that have been proposed by the MAHA movement, so the other big one is taking a look at chronic disease. So here's an interesting statistic. Since 1982, every birth cohort after 1982 has had a shorter life expectancy. So if you're born in 1983, you're expected to live fewer years than 1982. If you're born in 1984, you're expected to live for a shorter period of time than 1983. So we've had a declining life expectancy.
I'm in 84, so it's kind of interesting to me. Anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, no, and I'm in 82. So, and you look back and you're like, so why do we, year over year, why do we have a declining life expectancy since 1982 in the United States? It's puzzling. So then the other thing you can look at, other interesting statistics. So with COVID in the United States, for each person that died from COVID, we had the highest cost per fatality or treatment cost in the world. Okay, we also have the highest cost per fatality in a number of other diseases in the world. And this has been increasing ever since 1982. So our treatment costs are going through the roof. We're having worse patient outcomes, okay, than other countries compared to other countries. So what's causing this? Where's this coming from? And there's two simple things: nutrition and fitness. Nutrition and fitness are the cornerstone of wellness and health. And I firmly believe that Bobby is going to put a big focus on getting this country in shape, okay, getting Americans in shape, and getting us eating healthy again. If you look at foods and the food system in the United States, it's that we have, if you want to eat very healthy, nutritious foods, you can. If you want to eat terrible, overly processed, heavily, low nutritional value foods, you can. Maybe they taste delicious. There's a lot of heavily engineered foods that are available, which taste great, but are terrible for you. And if you look at also the economics around some of these food products, so some of these heavily processed foods are very affordable for people. And so that's why people choose to eat those food products versus other food products. So, this issue of food and nutrition is really complex, but really, if we can get people eating healthy again and working out, it'll probably solve the vast majority of the issues that we have with our life expectancy and public health in the United States. I mean, it's really simple. If you have good sanitation, you have good nutrition, you have a solid roof over your head, those are the basic things you need to be healthy. And this also, flows into another national security issue. Because we have such a unfit, obese nation, especially among our youth, most people that are military age for the selective service, or men specifically, are not eligible to be drafted or recruited into the military because they're so out of shape. And it's a terrible position to be in as a nation, but it's a very simple problem to correct.
And what is the percentage of that? Like, because I think it's pretty high. Percentage of people who don't qualify for military service because of their body habitus.
I believe it was somewhere in the 60 to 80% range. I haven't seen the DoD statistic in a while, but it's absurdly high.
60, 80% don't qualify.
That's correct. Because they have some kind of medical disqualifying characteristic. So it could be obesity. It could be, autism. It could be, it's a long list of things that can disqualify you. But that number of people, the percentage of people who are not eligible each year continues to increase as well. So this is trending up. Another alarming statistic.
What would it have been say in like 1982? What do you think the percentage of people who wouldn't qualify for the Army or the military at that point would have been?
Based on health-related conditions, I don't know, 20, 30%, much lower.
Yeah. So significantly less than what's going on now.
Oh, incredibly less.
So I know we chatted a little bit about the vaccines and what he's going to do there, and obviously for chronic disease, it is as simple as we do need to get people eating healthier and exercising again. I agree with that. But does he have any more like specific strategies? Like is he serious about like removing seed oils and replacing it with like beef tallow and that kind of thing, or is there anything else specifically that you're aware of that he may be doing?
Well, it's hard for me to put my finger on what policies he wants to push through the FDA, for example. So, Health and Human Services only regulates a portion of the food industry in the United States because food regulation is split between the USDA, so the United States Department of Agriculture, and the Food and Drug Administration. So USDA is its own agency. The FDA and USDA work closely together on a lot of food issues. And even the Department of Homeland Security sort of works on food issues with both the agencies. These things can get confusing in the US government. But this example, well, whether or not they're going to use beef tallow over seed oil, I don't know. So first thing, I don't know what he can do in terms of an actual policy that he can implement to pull seed oils off the market. A lot of public health is changing education and perception of what people should be eating. So the question is, how do you make beef tallow, if it's a healthier option, more available? And you could ask, like, I don't know exactly the benefits of beef tallow, because beef tallow have other negative health aspects that seed oils don't have. So oftentimes in health, it's a trade-off of, do you want like the issues of potential associated, like, do you want with seed oils, for example, there's some literature on that it could lead to inflammation and rectal disorders or disorders of the colon. But then with beef tallow, there's other issues with cardiovascular health. So oftentimes these things are
Yeah, and I
trade-offs.
mean, just to back up here, yeah, and just to back up here too, like I'm not someone who's super big on the seed oil strategy. Like I don't eat any seed oil. Seed oils aren't in my diet. They weren't in my diet before seed oils became a big thing, just because I mostly eat whole foods. So, they just don't show up in those in my type of diet. And then also too, like I haven't seen really like definitive research on like if you replace seed oils with like beef tallow, X and Y will go down and A and B will go up, and you're going to be a healthier person. Like I haven't seen any research on that. And I'm not someone who has also like thrown out LDL or low density lipoprotein out of the water. Like, I think that we've done a horrible job of just looking at LDL and not looking at other cardiovascular risk factors like CRP, for example, C-reactive protein. We should definitely be looking at, the triglyceride to HDL ratio. And, obviously we kind of have been looking at, blood pressure and hemoglobin A1C or blood sugar control all along and those kinds of things. And I do think we've focused too much on LDL, but I'm still not in the camp that like we can just throw it out completely. Like some people on carnivore and that kind of thing are real big on just, it doesn't matter what your LDL is. And then the other thing that I disagree with too is that I don't mean to get into nutrition too hard here now, is that I don't think that, it's irrelevant if you don't have fiber in your diet. I think that fiber is very important. There's a lot of really good research and studies on fiber. There's a meta-analysis that shows that just by adding 10 grams of fiber to your diet every day, it's going to decrease your overall mortality rate by 10%. So I am someone who supplements with a little bit of psyllium husk every night, because I do eat a ton of beef and I do eat a lot of meat, but it's mostly lean. And then also too, to try to reduce the LDL, make sure it doesn't get too high, I do use a little bit of fiber afterwards. And it is psyllium husk specifically, which is one that's also found in Metamucil, because that's the one that's been shown to have the most beneficial effect overall cardiovascular wise. So I'm on board with him making these changes. It's just that I may not agree with every single one of the changes that he's made. And that's just one of the ones that I've seen him talk about is seed oils and beef tallow. And it's not just him. There's a million people, out there who are, really against seed oils. And again, I don't think that you should try to include them in your diet. There's no real room for them in some sense if you, do have a really good diet overall. But at the same time, I just don't think that switching, seed oils for beef tallow is going to make as big of a difference as what a lot of people think.
Yeah, no, I think you're onto something there. And actually, so I didn't know about psyllium husk. Where do you get this?
So psyllium husk is just fiber. You can get it online. You can get it on Amazon. It's the best fiber out there in terms of reducing LDL, and that's why they probably use it in Metamucil. So yeah, that's definitely the best one, or the one that's most researched on cardiovascular disease anyway.
Yeah, that's interesting.
I was going to say though, in addition to that, like it seems like Bobby's really, he's obviously on TRT. I think he's been to Ways to Well. He knows, what's his name? Ferris, Bugler and those guys down there. Not that I know Ferris or anything. But I'm pretty sure he's been down there. And so a lot of people are interested, like a lot of the, it's not necessarily like just like, the bros kind of thing. It's a lot of people are interested in like peptides for, improving their overall health, longevity, specific like injuries like BPC 157 and TB 500 in particular. Like, is there any chance that like these may be a little bit more available once he gets in office?
I think so. I mean, so I think that Bobby's overall philosophy on medicine and health is that we should be using the best gold standard science to make informed decisions about health. So whether that's using psychedelics or other currently illegal drugs in the United States and legalizing those for therapeutic use, to vaccine technology, to actually nutraceuticals, vitamins, and testing those for clinical effectiveness against other diseases, that's how we're going to have significant improvements of health, is by actually using science to evaluate things that we typically don't evaluate because they're not patentable. And the main problem right now in public health and medicine, and what falls under Bobby's responsibility, is that we tend to only promote drugs via the government and regulate drugs via the government for solutions that are patentable and profitable. And if we take away that incentive structure, it changes the game in terms of what things we start looking at in terms of health. And then when you take a look at this, take this one step further, and you look at how we view the healthcare system. So right now, one of the biggest growing fields, and I think one of the futures, the future of medicine is functional health. So when you have a oldering functional medicine, excuse me, when you have an aging population, and if you're having hormonal changes, and you're having, I was just talking about before this we started recording the call, that I was having a nagging shoulder injuries, and as I've been getting older, I have more inflammation problems, and I went to go see a doctor in functional medicine. And when you start to look at the effects of things like hormonal changes as you age, whether it's estrogen level in a woman or testosterone in a man, they have big impacts on how you age. And as functional medicine becomes more mainstream and accepted, and there's more research happening around functional medicine, one of the findings I was most fascinated by in functional medicine with the clinical trials, when they looked at HCG when used in men. So HCG is a hormone that is produced by pregnant women, and they decided to inject this into men to see what would happen. And there were no negative side effects, and it produced a natural testosterone boost when injected into men. So I don't know who had the crazy idea at first to inject a pregnancy hormone into men, and I'm glad that it worked out well. But this is one of the areas of science that I think has a lot of promise for improving individual health, wellness, and longevity.
Yeah, actually, I just heard Peter Attia say that his T levels are low, and so instead of jumping straight to testosterone, he's going to give HCG a try. And I've used HCG with a lot of my patients before, particularly with fertility issues. And so HCG is actually something that you can take while you're on testosterone, and you can still get your wife pregnant that way, because some people will have to come off testosterone in order to restore their levels, but some people don't. They can just continue on with testosterone and HCG and still get and still become fertile. And some people prefer it that way too. Like it does become a little bit tedious because as you know, probably know, like you have to take at least 2 times a week. Oftentimes it's prescribed 3 times a week. And it is an injection, which some people, you know, don't like too much. In addition to, you know, potentially a testosterone injection if you're not on, you know, testosterone. So sometimes it can get a little bit tedious, but some people do like it, especially for really a lot of guys just don't want the testicular atrophy that comes along with testosterone. HCG does help with that. But the other thing too is that it does make you fertile. So I always tell guys like, listen, like you can take it if you want. It'll definitely make, you know, restore your nuts to where they were before, but
Yeah.
you also too might be real fertile. So you got to be, you know, really, really careful with that. But yeah, I mean, I think treatments like that more people, you know, want physicians talking about and more, and not just talking about, they want it available for treatment, you know? So I'm very happy that, you know, RFK is kind of into, you know, peptides, HCG, hormones, and, you know, the types of medicines a lot of people are really wanting to try, but unfortunately just can't get access to because, you know, it just hasn't become really part of mainstream medicine yet. But hopefully, you know, with the new Republican caucus and with RFK specifically, that'll really change. So yeah, that's something that I hope will definitely change. Um, so one thing that I wanted to really chat about this podcast was, you know, Trump's made some pretty big statements on the wars going on. You know, I'm going to call them wars. Some people call it the conflict, whatever it is. But, you know, between Russia and Ukraine and the Palestinians and the Israelis. So, you know, he's basically come out and said that he wants to end both of those wars. Like, how successful do you think that he's going to be at doing that? And like, what are the strategies that he's going to implement that aren't being implemented right now? I mean, not that there's any that's being good that are implemented right now, but, you know, what is he going to try to do to kind of mitigate all the conflict going on?
Well, it sounds like he's already doing it from Mar-a-Lago, is
Yeah.
my understanding. And it's a series of carrots and sticks. So you have to look at the incentive structure for both Ukraine, look at this from Ukraine's perspective and also Russia's perspective. So this is so first of all, Russia has a military industrial defense complex like the United States does. So there's big incentive for a war and conflict in Russia, just like we have in the United States. If you look at this from Ukraine's perspective, Zelensky has positioned himself with his backers, both financially and in the European Union, and along with the World Economic Foundation and being one of the players and other institutions like BlackRock, of having to win this war. There is no in his worldview, if he loses this war, he could lose his life, he could be exiled. There is extreme consequence for Zelensky himself to lose this war. Now, if you look at what makes this war feasible for Ukraine, is that this is a typical American shadow war. Okay, we're providing all the weapons. We're providing all the technology. The European Union is also supplying arms and money to fuel this war. Despite all that aid to Ukraine, Ukraine is losing territory on a continual basis. And this isn't even a full-scale war yet, meaning Russia has not deployed its air force against Ukraine like it would in a major all-out war. We stopped short of there actually being nuclear exchange between these two areas or something that could escalate to a larger regional nuclear war, thankfully. You know, the Biden administration continued to attempt to escalate this war by authorizing Ukraine to use long-range munitions to attack deep into Russia. And Putin has demonstrated restraint here. He didn't escalate the conflict back against Ukraine when Biden escalated the conflict after Harris lost the election. So Russia knows that we're in this transition period, and the only thing that President Trump, I think, has to do in this position is go to Zelensky in Ukraine and say, we're going to cut off the aid. We're going to cut off the aid. We're going to back out of this. And then really, what would, if Ukraine has any sanity left, I mean, what other option they have what other option do they have than negotiating a truce or some kind of peace agreement with Russia, because if the fighting continues after the U.S. withdraws aid, I think Russia is going to steamroll Ukraine, and there's not going to be Ukraine left or much of one. So
Yeah.
I
So
think the terms here are really easy to negotiate, because you have one side that's clearly going to win if the other side stops receiving aid.
yeah, I mean, a lot of people are calling it like, a war by proxy. They're saying that it's our war because, we're funding. I know I'm Canadian, you're American. I'm kind of speaking from an American standpoint. Not that we haven't given some aid, and the Canadians certainly need it, but it's nothing like the aid that you guys have given. So in terms of, what he's going to do, it's pretty simple. It sounds like, he would just say like, listen, we're going to cut off aid. And then if he does that, Zelensky more or less is going to have to surrender because he's just not going to have the tools and the resources that he had before.
I think you just summed it up very, very well. I don't see that this war is going to drag out more than another 3 or 4 months after Trump takes office. And then back to the earlier part of your question, you had asked what's going to happen with Israel and Palestine. I think that's a little bit more complex issue because of the sensitivities in that region. But personally, I don't think that Palestine has much of, I guess, any room to negotiate. And the question is, how much foreign aid or assistance or terrorist support Palestinians will continue to receive once Trump takes office. And given that the Trump administration has been strong in responding to threats from Iran and other nefarious Middle Eastern actors, I think the conflict between Israel and Palestine actually dies down as well. Just because we're actually, the United States under President Trump is so much stronger towards our enemies. I think they're going to be less bold and won't actually try to supply our enemy, so to speak, in Palestine.
Okay, so is it that when he becomes office, like, do you think that like the Palestinians are basically just going to become more like fearful, or like what is it exactly that will happen? Like like with the other conflict, you mentioned that he's going to cut off aid, and then Zelensky more or less will just sort of have to surrender. And so in this one, once he gets in office, like what is the sort of move that he's going to make, or what is the sentiment that's going to like die down the war overall?
Okay, well, yeah, let me tackle this from a different angle. So when Trump takes office, the people that supply Palestine with weapons and resources will probably stop transferring those weapons and resources to Palestine. So if they're getting a
How
lot of
come?
support, well, so the Biden administration, Democrats in the United States have actually had a lot of agreements, and they've been soft on enemies like their Indians are their the Palestinian allies in places like Syria, Lebanon, and Iran. And one prime example here is that during the Obama administration, then later the Biden administration, there had been a number of sort of under the table cash transfers to the Iranian regime, where the Iranian regime promised that they were not going to proliferate nuclear weapons. They were handed billions of dollars of U.S. cash not to do this. Then they turned around and bought tons of weapons and munitions. And then there are suddenly a bunch of Iranian-backed groups across the Middle East that launched terror attacks. So you can't really prove, at least without any intelligence, that the Iranians had supplied the resources to these terrorist groups to launch these attacks throughout the region. But you can sit back and you can take a look and say, well, what else caused this? So there were no attacks happening from Iranian-backed groups until we made these deals in the past. And all of a sudden they have the cash, and then they have the cash, and all of a sudden these groups start launching attacks. Because when you make deals with countries like Iran, at least from my perspective, they tend not to support the agreements over time. And I'm actually pretty hawkish on Iran, because if you look at how they behave, every time we make an agreement with them, they do something in secret behind our back. They don't uphold their side of the bargain, so to speak. And then on top of it, they take the things that we give them, they use it back against us and our allies. And I still view Iran as a threat to U.S. national security.
Yeah, well, I think that, it's something that a lot of people are going to be watching, obviously, once he becomes in power. But that is, one of the reasons why I think some people did vote for him is that they think that he's going to. I mean, no, there's a lot of other reasons. He's got an incredible caucus and all that kind of stuff. But there's a lot of people, have even said, Rogan's even said on his podcast, that even if he just stops the wars, like that's incredible just right there. So like it's definitely something that I think a lot of people are very, very hopeful of, and I certainly hope he stops them as well, so that we can get back to not sending so much foreign aid to other countries when we desperately need it ourselves. Um, so one thing too that I wanted to chat with you about today too is I know, and this is a big issue in Canada as well, and specifically actually in London, Ontario, because we have what's called the Safe Supply Program, which is just absolutely insane. I've had lots of people on the podcast talk about it before, but the fentanyl crisis that's going on, like how is he going to tackle that? Like what specific strategies do you think that he has? And is it something that even can be tackled, or is it just something that's going to persist, you think, in society, because there's really no way to control, drugs?
Well, that's interesting. So there are ways to control the drug trade, and I think this is not widely known, but you can't necessarily control the trade itself, but you can put more ethical people in the trade into power. And that's something that the intelligence community and the intelligence services are actually pretty good at. And so that means you have to have competent people running your intelligence agencies so that they do that. So this sounds sort of crazy, right? But um, in Central America, in Central America and South America, where a lot of our illegal drugs enter the United States, some of the nations are very corrupt. So you have a hard time working with and negotiating nation to nation to have agreements in place which can be enforced, because your trading partners' internal politics and dynamics and laws and regulations, everything's so corrupt, so you can't get people to follow through and uphold their deals. And the drug traffickers seize on this. Okay, so they either put their own cartel members into position of power within the government, within law enforcement, within the military. And so what you can do is you can help select which cartels are in business, because you're never going to make the corruption problem go away. You're not going to make the cartels go away because there's always a market for it. Well, hopefully then you can nudge the system to have ethical cartel members in power. As insane that sounds, it's actually an option that the intelligence services have. Then simultaneously, what you do is you go back to the trade policies, the migration enforcement policies that President Trump had in his previous administration, where you have our neighboring countries to the south enforce their own borders with their neighboring countries. The reason why illegal migration and trafficking went down during the Trump administration is because that's what the policy was that he previously implemented. So basically, the policy was that we would give foreign aid to countries like Mexico to enforce their migration policies with countries to the south. And we did that all the way down to South America. It was highly effective in preventing illegal migration north and also the flow of drugs. Simultaneously, the third thing that you can do is that most of this fentanyl is produced in China. Then the Chinese then ship these drugs to Central and South America, to places that are corrupt, places that don't have regulation. And you can actually pay foreign aid to these nations to regulate fentanyl more effectively within their nation to help get it off. So it's a three-pronged approach. So try to get rid of the most evil cartels and have only good cartels existing, whatever that might be. That sounds crazy, but I mean, that's really an option. Okay. Then you have migration policy enforced. And then you also then have fentanyl policy enforced, but all in our neighbors to the south. And you do that through good diplomacy and foreign aid.
Okay. So yeah, there's definitely a few strategies out there. Some of them, especially the first one, is not one that I think that a lot of people were expecting to hear, having good cartels, but it does seem like there are some, options. But, it does seem like it's, people use drugs. People, need something, I guess, to get a release with. And if there's a way to find it, somehow they are going to find it.
Yeah, and back to this, this bad versus good cartel thing. So what I just told, I just spoke about the quiet part out loud, which some people who are in the know in the U.S. government who works internationally are aware of. Black markets don't go away. The only thing that you can influence without creating a war against cartels is who the players are in the market. So you at least try to get the bad players out and get people who are friendly and want to help enforce your other policies strategically. And it's a crazy world, but you're never going to make drugs go away, and you're never going to get addicts completely to go away. And the other option of, I've heard other people in my conservative circle say, well, we need to declare that the cartels are terrorist organizations. Well, okay, so say that we declare that the drug cartels in Central and South America are terrorist organizations. Do you know what the consequence of that is? It's terrible. That means we can launch full scale military operations, and our allies can, against these cartels in Central and South America. What we'll do if that happens, that's very terrifying to me, because when we start sending helicopters and sending missiles and rockets into haciendas in Central and South America and killing the cartel members, we're going to kill their family members, we're going to kill kids, we're going to destroy villages and towns. We'll have targets that we hit on accident and innocents will get killed. We'll create a whole new wave of terrorists in Central and South America, which aren't trying to make money selling drugs, because that's what cartels care about, is the making money. We're going to create a whole new wave of terrorists in Central and South America if we do that.
Yeah, it sounds pretty scary to me right now. Like, if we based on that plan, like if that did happen, because I could see how you could just create a whole new slew of problems by doing that. So yeah, I mean, that's a tough one to tackle, fentanyl. Like it's not, and drugs in general, like it's just not something where there's, a perfect solution. You just kind of try to, understand that there's trade-offs and you try to make the best decisions possible, but it's something that you try to mitigate as opposed to just like eliminate completely, you know? Um, One thing that I wanted to ask you about, because you had a really interesting tweet that was just came up maybe a few days ago. It was about government employees accessing financial data. It was something like they had done this like 3 million times. So how is this happening? Like how are, government employees like accessing the personal financial data of Americans? And like, how did this happen? And do Americans know about this? Like what's going on there?
Well, there are a number of government systems that you can have access to for people's all sorts of stuff, their family history, court records, financial transactions. I mean, any type of information that you want to seek on an individual, there are typically government systems that exist where you can access that information. And what sounds like what is happening to me is that the role-based access control to those systems has a flaw. And that flaw could be a policy issue. It could be a policy issue where they're not enforcing the policy where employees should be doing this. It's not being regulated properly within the government. And it's sort of like wide open access in the Wild Wild West, and anyone can do this. I mean, it's all rather terrifying. And this just goes to show you that we need to have more honest people and people who have integrity working in the U.S. government to clamp down on these kind of behaviors, because there's no law or policy that you can make to prevent people from breaking the law. And if these people are basically engaging in illegal searches of the information of individuals, that's a crime. So what we really need to have is we need to have people with better integrity, morals, and ethics working in the government to clamp down on these behaviors so it stops.
Yeah, I mean, people don't want that. Like, I'm sure people who have read that tweet or saw that article that you posted are very upset about it because, people don't want their personal information, financial information, whatever it is, being accessed by people who shouldn't be accessing it. And so, yeah, I mean, we're going to have people with better integrity, better laws. And also too, like if you get caught doing it, there should be like a massive punishment for it. Like obviously you should lose your job, immediately. But there should be, something else, to that, because again, like you shouldn't be accessing people's personal information. So happy that you put that out there though, because again, it's just something that people may not be aware of. And there's 3 million times is obviously quite a few times. So it should be zero. Um, so one of the last things, I know I got you for another five minutes or so, I wanted to ask about was insider trading. And so, Nancy Pelosi is always one that people use as an example. Like her salary is, a couple $100,000 a year, and she's worth something like 200 million, something like that. So everyone who gets elected, or a lot of people who've got elected into the government in the past, have done some insider trading. Like their net worth has just like skyrocketed while they were in office or while they were in power. Is this something that RFK and the caucus is looking at to try to prevent from happening in the future?
Well, so the question is, how do you prevent insider trading? Well, I think the easiest way to prevent it is for Congress to pass a law to prevent members of Congress from having equity stakes in companies or businesses while they're holding office. If you look at how the U.S. government is structured under the Constitution, there's really not much that the executive branch could do. I mean, they could prosecute these people for insider trading. Typically, the executive branch doesn't like to go after members of Congress. I mean, the FBI does do a pretty good job of investigating people for corruption. But there's, the real fact is, if you're the Speaker of the House or the former Speaker of the House, you have a lot of political power. And even if they're not the majority, a former speaker might have a lot of pullback in their home state, like in her case, San Francisco and California. So, politically, any other Democratic governor or attorney general might go after the people that come after her. So this is the reason why the executive branch and Congress typically don't go after each other in that way. So everyone sort of turns a blind eye to it. But the best thing that could happen is we need to have campaign finance reform, which includes a couple of provisions, I think, which would be really popular. People want term limits. I'm not such a big fan of term limits. We have term limits in Michigan, and it's just as corrupt here. It's probably the most corrupt state in the U.S. But yeah, it's sad. That's a whole other story. But this idea of the campaign finance form of limiting donations to campaigns, and then also eliminating the ability for members of Congress and Senate to have equity stake in companies, whether it's shares or part ownership. That's really the issue here. And if you get rid of those two things, then you have fair elections and you don't have influence. And I think the way to actually politically make this viable, which is unpopular in a lot of groups, is to give these people massive pay raises. And everyone's like, well, you want to do what? And I'm like, well, okay, they already make a couple $100,000 a year. I go, well, if you look at corporate America, a lot of senior executives make, total compensation around $1 million a year. So what if we gave these people a big pay raise, paid them, $400,000 or $500,000 a year, but then took away all their ability to own equity stakes in companies, and made the policy tight so there were no loopholes to it, and also included the provision that they couldn't take donations for campaigns. And here's a statistic. So just real quick, the average congressman or woman comes out a multimillionaire. They're worth, $25 million after serving 3-4 terms in Congress, 1 term in the Senate. And they go in and they make $180,000, $200,000 a year. Obviously, they're not becoming millionaires from their salary. So if you look at the difference in terms of what we spend in terms of government, what happens in terms of government waste, taxation, and deficit spending in the U.S., based on these corrupt deals that they make, we're much better off paying these people $500,000 a year than we are for the consequences of trillions of dollars of wasteful spending. It's a drop in the bucket. And I think it's sort of a radical idea. I keep on trying to sell people on it. I get a lot of pushback from conservatives, but I think it's the way to do it.
Well, I think they should at least, input some point of policy in there where they make it illegal for, someone to benefit and hold all these stocks that they know that they can, make the skyrocket based upon a policy that they have, or they're based on a policy that they can implement. Like, that's insane to think that someone in government can, implement a new policy, and because that policy is going to be implemented, then a certain stock that they own is going to skyrocket, and then it's going to skyrocket their income. And obviously that's been happening all the time. So, something needs to be, someone needs to put a stop to that and do something about it.
But nobody will. And the reason why nobody will is because if you look at how the law or the bill has to move through the House or the Senate, nobody's incentivized to do the right thing. And here's the best part. You say like a bill like that comes to the floor and they have to vote on it. I mean, if it's a simple majority up or down, uh, you know, 60% of the people can be the bad guy and vote against it. And 40% can still be good guys, but secretly be against it because they made deals with the other people, like, of how they should vote because they knew it was going to tank anyways. That's the reality of how that system works.
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of sad, and I don't have you too much for longer, but it's kind of on the same topic there. But like the same thing with, like, someone who works in the FDA then gets to work for Merck or vice versa or whatever it is. Like, that seems to be pretty unethical too, So like, someone may work for, one company, whether it's like the FDA or Merck, and then they can, switch to the other company and then benefit from that. Like, that seems to be a little bit unethical. Like, are there any laws that may be put in place? Have they talked about doing anything about that? Or,
I don't really have so much of a problem with that myself. And the problem is the glaring instances that people learn about. So there's like the very famous case of Purdue Pharma's FDA regulator who wrote the exemption for Oxy, right?
right.
And so this guy, he went from a regulator. He didn't want to pass OxyContin to be approved. He thought it was highly addictive and all this thing. And he worked with Purdue Pharma to tweak the language on that drug so it could be be approved. And after it was approved, then he went over to Purdue Pharma and he got paid tons of money as an executive. There is
Like,
a lot of back and forth.
That sounds illegal, but anyways, go ahead.
Well, no, exactly. I mean, like, that is a terrible case, right? Like, that's like the worst offending case. Then there's a lot of cases where I've known people who worked on the regulatory side and went over to industry. And very few people go back to the government. Usually the government pays less, but they hire more junior people in public health, in medicine, like in the regulatory affairs areas. And then once they have more experience, then they're typically acceptable to be hired by the medical or the food industries. So I haven't seen a ton of corruption from this back and forth, like the employers being hired, but it does happen. And the question is to what degree it happens and how big of a problem is it? And it's really tricky here because it seems like when it does happen, you have these terrible instances like with OxyContin, that the magnitude and the harm that it does is off the charts. But think about, you're the individual here, right? And like you yourself, and you go get a job with the FDA as a regulator, and then all of a sudden, you're sick of your job. You're not corrupt. You're not doing anything illegal. Okay. And the pharmaceutical company or the food company offers you 2 to 3 times the money. Well,
Probably
I don't know.
take it.
Yeah. So I don't know what the fair mechanism is to prevent non-corrupt people from doing that. I think the mechanism here, which would be the correct policy, is that we either criminalize and heavily penalize the people who do this unethically. The trick is how you write a law like that so it's enforceable around ethics. That's tricky.
That is tricky. No, I understand your point there. I mean, hopefully, the guy who did, the OxyContin case is more of an isolated case, but we don't really know that for sure. Anyways, I know I've gone over the hour here now. And thank you so much again for coming on and doing this. But please tell people where they can learn more about you, your Twitter handle, and anything else that you got going on.
Sure. You can go to andrewhuff.com. Check out my personal website. I don't update it as frequently as I should. And I'm most active on X these days, at AG Huff. And that's pretty much where I'm online.
Sweet. Well, man, thank you so much for coming on the show. Super appreciate it. Thank you so much, everyone, again, for listening. And yeah, I definitely want to have you back on the show again, especially, as more developments happen that we, couldn't talk about today. But, once those developments do happen, I definitely want to have you back on. So thanks again for coming on. And thanks so much, everyone, for listening. And as always, we'll be back again with another episode soon.